I've always wondered whether Harry could have shook Draco's hand if Draco had been completely different than the one we knew. Is there any possibility that this friendship could have existed? So in today's video we'll be discussing whether Harry and Draco could have ever been friends. However, I'm not considering the cursed child in this video and how Draco changed and everything, so let's put that aside. This video is all about their first impressions of each other and the Philosopher's Stone. Draco Malfoy was fool at Hogwarts. Yes, he was cocky, he was awful to Harry, got mixed up in a very dark crowd, and was generally, just as Ron would call him, a git. All of these things are very fair to say. However, was all of this behavior down to influences in Draco's life? If he had made better choices, made better friends, could things have been different for him? Could he then have been friends with someone like Harry? If he had the ability of being a better person, if his parents had been kinder, maybe he would have been kinder, and then he might have seemed more attractive to Harry as a mate. Very much a product of his parents' making, Draco was bragging around Hogwarts with his friends about how great he was being rich, being in Slytherin, and being pureblood. But these are all things he was taught to be proud of. Draco's logic were very much passed on by mom and dad, Lucius and Narcissa, who in return absorbed these qualities from their own families, the Malfoys and the Blacks respectively. Both families played a role in dark magic, and the idea that to be a Muggle or have no magical blood, or to be half in some way, was wrong. It is no surprise that a lot of family members on both sides were connected to Lord Voldemort. So Draco was simply too covered in this world to think any differently, and within this general mindset came a lot of cruelty, anger, and coldness, which all began to shape his personality. But what does all of this have to do with being friends with Harry? Well, it was Draco's general behavior that disgusted Harry in the first place. Harry had already got the measure of Draco's first act of rudeness back in Diagon Alley, when he had displayed prejudice towards his half-giant friend Hagrid, something his parents would have taught him to feel. Hagrid was the first person Harry could really remember being kind to him at all, so that was never going to go down in Draco's favor when it came to friendship. But there was something else about Malfoy that Harry would never have considered being his friend. Draco liked to make people feel like outsiders. During his long years with the Dursleys, Harry had been made to feel like the outsider, the poor relation every single day he spent at the cupboard rather than a real bedroom. For so many years, Harry had been the wrong sort to the Dursleys, who liked to remind him of it at every opportunity. He knew what it was like to be the person other children were nasty about at school, and he also knew what it was like to be constantly told that some people were better than the others. There are examples of wizards who came from dark wizarding families who did choose different company to become better people. Sirius Black is probably the best example of this, running away from his pureblood loving family that he didn't agree with. Sirius' bravery led him to the Hogwarts house Gryffindor. The rest of his family were usually Slytherins, and there he found his like-minded friends, James, Remus, and Peter. So Sirius broke the cycle of the rest of his family and spent the rest of his life fighting against the darker side of the wizarding world, rather than joining it. Draco could have chosen different friends and a different attitude at Hogwarts, just like Sirius. But Draco was always chased by fear and insecurity. In later books, we began to learn that Draco was terrified of his Death Eater father's way of life, despite often bragging about it. Draco and Harry might have had shared a love for Quidditch, both playing Seeker on their house teams, and indeed, they had a shared experience of being raised by a bully, Lucius for Draco, and the Dursleys for Harry, but that was never going to be enough to mean these two would ever be friends. If Draco had been encouraged to be more open-minded, maybe he would have met people who challenged his viewpoints, rather than Crabbe and Goyle, who simply always agreed with him. Only a very different Draco could have been friends with Harry, something that was never going to happen.